Welcome back, everybody, to the Peer-to-Peer Policy Pod. This week, we are covering the Senate market structure delays, movement and delays, a push for implementing President Trump's Bitcoin and retirement executive order. A interesting week, I think, for technology at the UN. Trump and Elon meet again in person, and much more. But remember to follow me on X at MorganSternNJ. Follow the pod on Apple, YouTube, Spotify, Rumble, wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Zach, where shall we start?
All right. Well, we'll start on Capitol Hill. So the rumor mill is swirling that next week's long anticipated Senate Banking Committee markup on market structure could be delayed. So Brian, what's the latest news on this? And is there a potential time frame for actually getting this done?
Yeah, so there was going to be a markup in the Senate Banking Committee next week. That seems to be pulled down, and they're now pushing it back by about 3 weeks. Week of October 20th is what they're talking about. Eleanor Terrett, who is a very well-sourced reporter on all things crypto, is reporting that that hearing has been pushed off. The Democrats really do want to come to the table. So the bad news is it's like one step forward, two steps back. The one step forward is the Democrats are getting more enthusiastic about this. That's great. We want bipartisan consensus. There's a group of 12 of them who put out their list of principles that they want for market structure. They are now kind of haggling over what the process is going to look like. Another kind of elephant in this room is that the Senate Banking Committee has a discussion draft. The Agriculture Committee does not. And we've discussed this on the pod before, but for anybody who's not following this day to day, the reason the Agriculture Committee has to have buy-in on a market structure bill is because assets like Bitcoin and potentially others are commodities that would be regulated by the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, which is overseen by the Agriculture Committee. So you really need both committees to be working together here. On the House side, that worked quite well. G.T. Thompson, chair of Ag, French Hill, chair of Financial Services, were hand in glove. They got the Clarity Act through the House. So now the Senate is working on their version. I will say last week when we had that roundtable with the speaker, the industry side of the room and the House leadership side of the room seemed to be pretty much lockstep. The Clarity Act had litigated a lot of the issues that are yet to be resolved in the Senate, and I think they landed in a pretty good place. So their desire from a lot of the industry leaders and the House leadership is that the Senate would take up the Clarity Act. And if they want to make tweaks, but let's not reinvent the wheel. That's their position. The Senate seems more intent on doing that. So we'll see where this goes. If you'll recall, the Genius Act, which was considered an easier lift because it was limited to just stable coins, required quite a bit of presidential leadership and cajoling to get that through the House and the Senate. We may need a little bit of presidential cajoling to get the Clarity Act further down the line. But right now, House and Senate, Senate Dems and Republicans, ongoing conversations with a target for a hearing markup by October 20th. I will say here's a big if, but it could be a positive if the Banking and Agriculture Committees can both be ready to move in October. Then I think there's real hope for getting this bill passed by the end of the year, which I believe was the president's call. Now, he wanted all this done by the 4th of July. That didn't happen. Got Genius Act done over the summer. Now they're talking about Clarity Act by the end of the year. That's still not off the table. It's still very possible, but there has to be a lot of work by Senate, Ag, and Banking Committee members. And of course, all of this in the context of a potential government shutdown coming up at the end of September, which is 5 days from now when we're recording. So a lot of moving parts. Like I said, the one step forward is the Dems actively engaging, which is a positive. The step back is that now everything is sort of, the timeline's getting pushed out. And as we get closer and closer to election silly season, it makes it harder and harder to find consensus and pass a bill. So that's the status. We remain hopeful, cautiously optimistic. We will see what happens.
Well, as my college professor, Dr. Bailey, always used to say, tune in, tune in, and we will keep following that story here. And the one good thing, and I think just to emphasize that point, from the people that we've talked to, the conversations that we've had, it does seem like what the Democrats are doing is actually it seems like that group of 12 have a good faith intentions in trying to advance good public policy. So that's encouraging. It slows things down, but hopefully it will end up with a good product. Well, a product that has some people concerned, and the White House has opined on it this morning, is the world is descending on New York City this week for the opening of the UN General Assembly. And there is a group of over 200 researchers, scientists, Nobel Prize winners, politicians, and the like that released a statement called the, quote, Global Call for AI Red Lines. So there's an accompanying website with some FAQs that expound on that statement. The statement's short. It's about 4 paragraphs. You can go check out their website if you want to see what the statement says and kind of what their take on it is. But Brian, what is your take more generally on a call for international red lines for AI?
Yeah, I mean, so they're trying to put limits on something whose potential we're still developing and realizing. And I will say, based on my experience working at the Treasury Department and White House, having been exposed to how a lot of these international organizations work, I can tell you I have become deeply distrustful of them because they mostly don't align with the American worldview of individual empowerment, individual rights that come from God. These are not things typically that international organizations agree with. So I think the president has rightly been pointing out, what exactly is the purpose of the UN and what has it accomplished? It hasn't been the best. I mean, if you look at its Human Rights Council, they've had countries like Iran, on the Human Rights Committee. They don't have the best track record. So an international organization trying to set rules and put red lines through functions of a technology that has the potential to revolutionize the world in very positive ways, I am innately skeptical of that. So I think the best encapsulation of that view, I think, is coming directly from the White House, actually. So I wanted to read Michael Kratsios, who I know, he's great. He's the director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy at the White House. And his sort of brief statement, he tweeted, you can watch him read his speech at the United Nations if you want. It's on his Twitter. But he said, we totally reject all efforts by international bodies to assert centralized control and global governance of AI. We believe that the responsible diffusion of AI, insert editorial, decentralization for individual empowerment, will pave the way to a flourishing future, one of increased productivity, empowered individuals, and revolutions in scientific advancement. The path to this world is found not in bureaucratic management, but in the freedom and duty of citizens, the prudence and cooperation of statesmen, and the independence and sovereignty of nations. We believe broad overregulation incentivizes centralization, which again comports with our kind of Bitcoin ethos. It stifles innovation and increases the danger that these tools will be used for tyranny and conquest. Ideological fixations on social equity, climate catastrophism, and so-called existential risk are dangers to progress and obstacles to responsibly harnessing this technology as an extension of human ingenuity and capacities. I mean, bravo to Director Kratsios, because the president's speeches at the UN that I've watched over the years are all about leaders of a nation should be advocates for their nation, for their people. They should not be ceding authority, ceding the ability to innovate to these international bodies that are really not accountable to anyone. The elected leaders of the people should be advancing the interests of their people, not of bureaucracies that exist to grow themselves. So I'm in line with Kratsios. I think his response was right on. I understand there are some dangers with AI. I'm not naive about that. But having an international body drawing red lines through certain functions before we even really understand the potential is a recipe for stifling growth, stifling innovation, and stifling individual rights, probably most importantly above all. So that is my take on this, and I'm glad the United States government took the position that they reject this call. I did a brief look through a lot of the signatories. Not all, I just did some spot checking, just picking random ones. Pretty much, I mean, at least of the dozen or so that I was clicking through, all seem to be leftist aligned. This is not like a bipartisan consensus that we have to protect people from the dangers of AI. this is really central planning consensus. People who favor more centralized authority and less individual empowerment, they all seem to be aligned. That's usually what I check whenever I see a letter from hundreds of insert label scientists, Nobel Prize winners, whatever it is. If they're all reaching consensus on an issue, I see, all right, is this an ideologically diverse group or is this a homogenous group? And this, based on just some spot checking, seems to be pretty homogenous in favor of central planning. And so I think the US government's response is pretty much right on in terms of my opinion. So that's where I land on that.
And that is, I mean, so phenomenally written. And I guess if he said that to that effect when he gave his speech at the UN, that is phenomenal. And the other thing I think that's lost in this too is that all of these efforts to attack fossil fuels and certain technologies, Bitcoin specifically and AI and stuff like that, that is an impediment to develop and human flourishing in the third world. We have heard so many great stories at conferences we've been at and some of the human rights folks that have, Alex Gladstein, I believe is his name, and people that have benefited from the use of Bitcoin in authoritarian regimes, unleashing energy, frankly, in any form, but particularly like in fossil fuel forms to parts of the world where people would otherwise walk 9 miles each way to get water, can help with wells and all those sorts of things. So this sort of reflexive anti-technology, this sort of knee-jerk reaction by these scientists, I wonder how much they've thought about the real world impacts that these technologies can have for a lot of parts, for people all over the world. I don't want to talk about parts of the world. I want to talk about people all over the world. It's a short statement. It's, it's a little light on substance, but I think the characterization of it by what you just said and what by the director said, I think is spot on, and it limits innovation, it limits human flourishing, and it's not good. It's not good for anyone.
Yeah, and I think J.D. Vance had pointed out in one of his speeches when he did his European tour. He had pointed out that Europe is so focused on risks and not focused enough on opportunity. And I think this statement from these participants at the UN, I think, reflects too much of a focus on risk, not enough of a focus on opportunity. So glad the U.S. government is sticking up for itself and for the American people and American industry.
Yep. And again, another story that we'll keep tracking here on the podcast. So moving on to our next segment, we have actually a good update on a story that we covered last month. So in early August, President Trump issued an executive order to open up greater investment choices for Americans in their retirement accounts. So I think your 401k or your 403b. And that includes being able to invest in digital assets like Bitcoin and in things like private equity. But for a bipartisan group of House lawmakers, the government is not moving fast enough. So Chairman French Hill and some others, they sent a letter to the SEC chair saying essentially in as many words, hurry up, get it done. So Brian, refresh our recollection about what this executive order is. What is the purpose of these type of letters? And ultimately, what does this do for American investors?
Yeah, so there's an executive order from the president directing the Department of Labor actually has jurisdiction over things like ERISA, so rules for your 401k. And it directs them to look at these rules and see if they can broaden the aperture and allow people saving for retirement to include not just boring mutual funds, but maybe look at some of the macro trends and be able to invest in cryptocurrency, be able to invest in private equity, which is typically reserved just for accredited investors and not in retirement accounts. So the president ordered labor to look at these rules and see if they could broaden the options for Americans saving for retirement. The letter from House members was to encourage the SEC which of course oversees the equity markets, to swiftly assist the Secretary of Labor to make these necessary changes. So not surprising, I would expect the SEC to have to offer some technical assistance, to the Labor Department in developing these rules. So the House is saying, chop, chop, Chairman Atkins and Labor Department, let's get moving on this. What's good, I think, for investors here, look, Bitcoin is, I have heard it referred to so many times as the best performing asset of the last decade. It's gone up some 50,000% as the purchasing power of a dollar has decreased by about a third. So people who are wanting to safeguard their retirement, I think really should have the option of looking at Bitcoin and at looking at some of these investments, private equity investments that typically only rich people can invest in. I think everybody should have more options. So it's more freedom for investors. It gives them more options for safeguarding their retirement. And one thing I wanted to point out for our friends in the Bitcoin community, I spoke with a couple people last week from different areas who said that really private equity has been all over this and visiting with the Labor Department, really pushing hard to get these rules modernized. But the Bitcoiners and the crypto community really has not been engaging very much. So I do want to encourage our Bitcoiner friends to engage with your elected representatives, engage with the folks at the Labor Department and the SEC, and make sure that your voice is heard. Because even if, look, we're talking about a multi-trillion with a T dollar market of retirement savings. One estimate I saw, like $14 trillion. If even a small slice of this starts adopting Bitcoin as a percentage of a portfolio to hedge against risk, you're going to see a massive increase in demand for Bitcoin. It's going to become that self-fulfilling prophecy that Satoshi described. The value is going to go up because the supply is not going anywhere. So more demand equals more value for everybody involved. So just a call to action for Bitcoiners, engage on this issue. It's very important. It can be good for you. It can be good for many Americans. And I think it's a very important issue. Glad that the White House saw this, flagged this issue, issued the order. Now it's time for the bureaucracy to move forward. I think they want to, but they need to hear from you. But these processes have to be engaging. They have to have public comments. They have to consider the comments. And if they don't hear from you, then you might not get very good rules. And the American people could be harmed by that. So talk to your government, encourage them to let you have Bitcoin in your 401k if you so choose. Again, this is about choice. If somebody doesn't want to, they don't have to. But for them to not be allowed to is unfair. And I think they could miss out on gains. So that is that issue. Engage. Tell them that you want Bitcoin in your 401k. If you want it, you should at least be allowed to have it. So that is where that issue stands. They're going through the process, and hopefully we will have some good results very soon. It's a good idea for an EO. Now is implementation. And don't get boxed out by some very deep pockets in the private equity industry. Let's make sure everybody can thrive. So that is my message on that.
This was a really interesting tweet. For our next segment, I want to hop over to the world of Twitter, or X as it were. So a really interesting tweet that has around 13 million views. And it's a video of Donald Trump and Dana White talking in the box at Charlie Kirk's memorial when Elon Musk walks up and sits down. Could have been awkward, but it didn't seem like it was. So they all shake hands. And then the tweet says that there is a lip reader who saw them speaking. And so reportedly, the lip reader claims that the president said, "So Elon, I've heard you wanted to chat." And then he says, "Let's try and work how to get back on track." And then after Musk simply nods, Trump says, "I've missed you." So this is gonna be a leading question, but I think this is great. I think it's really nice to see. I don't know why, but it made my heart so happy. I think Elon Musk is such an interesting character. I've Walter Isaacson's book that I read. It's about this thick, and he is so likable. And at the same time, you like really understand why some people are put off by him. And I do think a lot of it has to do with the Asperger's. I don't think that he always gets social cues, and he certainly does. He's certainly not politically correct, but all of that to say, if any of this is true, I do think it is a genuinely nice moment. So Brian, after I led with that, what was your take on that video?
Yeah, I think it's very positive. I think the most powerful man and the richest man should be working together to help Western civilization thrive. So I am glad to see them on better terms. Elon's tweets throughout the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's assassination have been quite interesting. He seems to be maybe finding God a little bit. And I think understanding what civilization is up against with some of the radical violence that has been happening, attacks on ICE just in the last couple of days. Of course, the attack on Charlie, the assassination attempts against Trump, the firebombing of Tesla dealerships. So I think David Sachs had tweeted out, and someone else had used the Ben Franklin quote of, "We must all hang together, or surely we will hang separately." I think the violent attacks coming from the left side of the ledger are bringing more unity on the right side, or center right. I don't consider Elon a conservative per se, but someone who thinks at least the left has drifted away from him. And so I view this as positive. If you have the best entrepreneur and the president on good terms, I think in this context, that is very positive. So I'm glad to see the reconciliation happening. I hope it sticks, and I hope they find ways to work together for the good of the country. So heartwarming. I agree.
Yeah, it was. There was just something about it that it just made my heart happy. So that it was good to see. Okay, this should be an interesting segment. So we've seen, and I think it kind of goes to one of the last points that you made, but we've seen a number of high profile heirs and family dynasties making strategic moves lately in media, finance, and tech. And some appear to be sort of shaping the future of major institutions in ways that contrast with the historically left-leaning establishment in these spaces. So, Brian, are we witnessing a generational shift in influence from sort of traditional media, banks, and nonprofits towards new arenas like cryptocurrency, social media, and entertainment, where the next wave of institutional power is trending sort of right-leaning or even libertarian?
I do think that, and it's been quite striking. So when I was working at the White House in 2020, some of us would be demoralized at times because it felt like Trump wasn't running against Joe Biden. It felt like he was running against CBS, ABC, NBC, all of Hollywood, every university, Time Magazine, even Webster's Dictionary was changing definitions. I recall during the Amy Coney Barrett confirmation hearings, changing definitions to make it seem like things she said were offensive. I mean, it just seemed, Twitter, of course, at that time, this was pre-Elon purchasing it, was so slanted, so biased. It just felt like we were screaming into a hurricane if you had a different opinion. Debanking, of course, was happening, censorship. It seemed like everything was dominated by one side of the political spectrum. Now, fast forward to today, look at some of the families that were kind of perpetuating that. George Soros is the boogeyman for people on the right. His son, Alex, taking over. You have the Open Society Foundation, which everybody knows funds a lot of pretty radical left-wing causes. Many believe they've been behind a lot of the Summer of Love riots, Antifa, etc. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, typically a little bit left leaning. I mentioned pretty much every media outlet, every university. Now look at today, and you have Larry Ellison of Oracle fame, briefly becoming the richest man in the world just in the last couple of weeks. His son, David, is now taking over operations. They executed the merger with Skydance, Paramount, CBS. They're looking to acquire Warner Brothers Discovery. They're looking to integrate in the news piece of CBS, potentially Bari Weiss and the Free Press, her news startup, and then having Bari Weiss be in a senior editorial position. I think this is great because all of the major news broadcasts are still widely watched, but they're all pretty uniform with one political orientation. I think we need to diversify. I think people need a more balanced view of the world. And so I think the Ellisons wading into media, the legacy media, is good. They are also reportedly going to be in the ownership group of TikTok. So not just legacy media like CBS News, also getting into new media and how young people are consuming information on TikTok. And importantly, there's been reporting that the US owner group would control the algorithm of TikTok US's operation. So having influence, hopefully, over the neutrality of how the algorithm works. Of course, the Murdochs are no stranger to this. They reportedly are going to be in the TikTok deal as well. They own Fox News, Wall Street Journal, the New York Post. But they've typically been seen as kind of I guess, catering to that niche audience of half the country, but they've been up against, like I said, every other institution. So now we have this balancing happening in the media space and the delivery of information space. We look at banking over the last, decade or so has drifted very far to the left, focusing not on services to their customers, but on things like climate. And there's been debanking with, firearms companies or religious organizations, things you might typically associate with right-leaning individuals. Now you have like the Secretary of Commerce's sons, the Lutnicks, running Cantor Fitzgerald. They're making big strides in innovation when it comes to crypto and individual empowerment. You have the Trump family themselves, the sons, investing heavily in the crypto industry. And they have said frequently it's because they thought debanking was dangerous. They thought they were marginalizing certain opinions and people. They want to democratize, small d, democratize the financial system. You have, I mentioned, of course, Elon Musk purchasing X, trying to make X more neutral. I mean, the Bezos in the Washington Post saying they're going to focus on personal liberties and free markets. I don't know that you can call the Washington Post right-leaning, but maybe they're getting more centered. That's a good thing. The owner of the LA Times brought Scott Jennings onto their editorial board. You've seen pushback against Colbert and Kimmel in late night comedy. Greg Gutfeld now is the king of late night with the highest rate. I mean, before Jimmy Kimmel was suspended, now he's back. Before he was suspended, Greg Gutfeld's ratings, I was looking into the ratings on Fox News. Greg Gutfeld's ratings were tripling Jimmy Kimmel's ratings. That's incredible. So I think we always say politics is downstream from culture. And I think the culture had swung so far to the left from, I guess, maybe the Obama era up until recent years. And now the pendulum is swinging back towards the right. And so we are seeing a very major shift. Universities, I think, are going to be cracking down more on anti-Semitism. There's new innovative competition in the university space. You have University of Austin in Texas, founded by, I believe, Bari Weiss, Joe Lonsdale, and some others. I'm even seeing it. We have a daughter. She's a baby, but we're starting to think about like where might we send her to school. And there's a lot of alternative like grade schools now popping up of kind of an enlightenment theme, getting away from your typical public education, which I think has drifted very far to the left. So there does seem to be this broad rebalancing in society, in academia, in media, in social media, even in the financial system, trending more towards individual rights and less centralized control. And as Bitcoiners, I think we'd agree that's better. There's more competition. You have more laboratories of democracy. You have more opinions being represented. And I think a more fulsome way of hopefully learning, being a more cohesive and productive society. It's really interesting to see just how dramatic things can change in just a few years. So the Soros family was kind of this boogeyman as a symbol for dominating, left-wing culture that was infiltrating every institution. Now you have more conservative families like the Ellisons and others really investing in the culture and making sure there's more perspective shared. Just fascinating. So wanted to highlight that very broad cultural shift that's happening in so many of these institutions these days. And in my opinion, it should give everybody hope for the future. Things are getting better. And it's a testament to America and our republic, our representative republic, that it can be self-correcting. We got off track, but we're getting back on a better track. And it's because people are waking up and they're voting with their feet. They're moving from state to state, finding more hospitable environments for their values. And I think that kind of decentralized control is very healthy. And it's playing out not just at this macro level, but at state and local levels in every institution imaginable. I don't know. Interesting observation. Just wanted to share that with the audience and see what people think.
Yeah. Great segment. Great observations. And I think it's encouraging. I hope it's encouraging for the people, because I think the people often feel helpless, hopeless, like you said. I think there's a lot of people who feel like they're screaming into a hurricane on a lot of things. And it does take, it just seems like all of those sort of levers are moving now. So hopefully there's a little more hope. Hopefully there's some perspective on things. So very interesting Very interesting thoughts that you provided there. All right. We'll skip over to our final two fun segments. So the next segment is a game called What's the Headline? As a reminder, I'll provide context of an actual news story, and then we'll supply a made up headline. So we're pretty much like ripping off The Onion, but it's a fun one. So the story. President Trump goes to the UN. As he and the First Lady step on an escalator, it stops. Then he gets up and gives a speech and his teleprompter starts working. So he tells the UN, look, I ended 7 wars. And then he chastises the UN for the only thing they ever gave him was a broken escalator and a teleprompter. And then the really funny thing was he went off on this tangent about how, like, if the First Lady wasn't like is in such good shape and wasn't so strong, she would have like fallen and gotten hurt. So it's like only Donald Trump could do that. So Brian, Trump goes to the UN and he faces technical difficulties. What is the headline?
Yeah, I said the UN puts the in unhelpful because we already talked about how their track record is not great in terms of creating a more peaceful and prosperous world. And if they can't even operate an escalator, or if there's sabotage or whatever it was, and they can't operate a teleprompter, and then there was also a report that his speech, the sound system wasn't working properly. Whether this was malice or incompetence, I just feel like it's very symbolic of
Yes.
how the UN has worked or not worked, as the case may be.
Oh, that is great. So for my headline, put Trump demands the Nobel Prize after surviving UN escalator and teleprompter malfunctions. Oh, that's great.
Add those to the 7 wars that he's ended. And he survived an escalator debacle.
Oh goodness. Well, it seems like history is always made when President Trump steps on an escalator. Well, going over to our second story of this game. So Jimmy Kimmel makes some statements about Charlie Kirk's death. Advertisers and affiliates say they want to pull the plug. The FCC commissioner makes some comments about ABC. ABC suspends Jimmy Kimmel indefinitely. And then a week later, they lift the suspension and put him back on the air. But some affiliates have decided that they're going to preempt his show anyway. So, Brian, the Jimmy Kimmel saga continues. What is the headline?
Yeah, I said Jimmy Kimmel misgendered the man show because his behavior in all of this has been anything but manly. It's been pretty disgraceful, in my opinion. His big comeback, and he did get good ratings for his comeback, which I guess to be expected. But in addressing the issue, he started crying, and in no part of his comments did he acknowledge that he lied, and he blamed the assassination on left-wing violence, which it obviously was based on the engraved bullet casings, for heaven's sake. His non-apology was pretty pathetic, and he was like crying during it. So I think he surrendered his man card, and the man show is now misgendered. And that, I think, based on his ideology, is a fireable offense. So I think he may be refiring himself. I don't know. But if he can't keep his ratings at a respectable level, he's probably on his way out anyway. So there we go. Jimmy Kimmel misgendered the man show.
All right. That leaves Adam Carolla as the only man from the man show left. So for my headline, I said ABC caves to pressure, puts Kimmel back on air, semicolon, affiliates say, hold my beer.
Yeah.
All right. Well, for our final segment, we'll end in the traditional way with the grab bag segment. And for me, I want to give a shout out to WWE. I'm a big pro wrestling fan. I think the product is kind of hit and miss at times, but lately I think they've been doing some really great things. So John Cena is on his retirement tour. He has only like 4 or 5 more appearances left on the calendar before his final retirement match. Getting to see some fun matches. His last match against Brock Lesnar was stupid, but we'll let that one slide. Over in the women's division, there was an epic match between two female wrestlers, Io Sky and Stephanie Vaquer, for the vacant women's world championship. It was a really great storyline as well. And there was a mixed tag match between 2 married couples. So Seth Rollins and Becky Lynch, they're the bad guys right now in WWE. They're picking on CM Punk, who came back to WWE after like 10 years. Becky Lynch gets into a match. She helps her husband win a championship match against CM Punk. She spends the next few weeks kind of trash talking him, slapping him. And then CM Punk gets fed up and he said, look, I would never hit a woman, but I know someone who would. And out comes CM Punk's wife, AJ Lee, who herself is a retired wrestler. She wrestled a decade ago. She was a women's champion back then. It was in Chicago, CM Punk's hometown. She got a thunderous reception. They had a really great tag team match. There was a good payoff. The good guys won. So great storyline, good match. Great to say AJ Lee back, and just fun to see some of the things that WWE's been doing here in the last few months.
That's great. And it gives me nostalgia because I watched WWE throughout like junior high school years. I will always have a soft spot for Stone Cold Steve Austin. The Rock, I don't care how many movies he makes and how big a celebrity he becomes, he will always be the people's champ to me. So love it when the WWE gets stuff right. In keeping with that theme, if you want to feel old, everybody, Super Mario is turning 40. And I remember playing Super Mario Brothers when I was a kid, and I still get the song stuck in my head sometimes, that dee 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 dee, and then the underground worlds of the na 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 na. It's so fun, and so it turned 40, and there was an article in Axios about it, the glitch that started it all, and it highlighted some of the underground worlds where you could put in a code and then you'd end up, and then I think go down one of the flower pots or something, and you'd be in like a whole new little side world, parallel universe. And that apparently was not supposed to be ready for prime time. And there was like a glitch that people were able to exploit to get into those alternate worlds that wasn't supposed to happen, but it did. And people loved it. So anyway, I didn't play a ton of video games as a kid, but Super Mario I played a lot because Nintendo came out when I was very little. And so that was like all the rage. And I cannot believe that Super Mario is a 40. That makes me feel very old, but also very nostalgic. So, all right, everybody. I think that is all the time we have for this week's episode, but thank you for joining us. Remember to follow me on X at MorganSternNJ. Like and subscribe to follow us on Apple, YouTube, Spotify, Rumble, wherever you get your podcasts. Send us a note, comment, see if we said something you like, if we said something you don't like, you have questions for us. We'd love to hear from you. And hopefully we'll see you next time on another episode of the Peer-to-Peer Policy Pod. Thanks, everybody.